So I'll start off while questions are being generated. I will pass this first one to Dr. Duma. Thank you. In an effort to reduce concussion rates in football, some have called for the removal of face masks or helmets. Can you comment on what you feel that'll do to the sport, improve, reduce injury rates?
I guess this is on.
Oh, can we get the microphones, please?
So we get that question a lot, and I think people sort of forget where football was in the 50s and 60s before the modern football helmet, where you'd have 25 to 30 fatalities every year, really significant brain injuries. So I think especially if you look at what the NFL's doing, it's possible to control the level of head impact by the rules and the litigation, but you're always going to have the accidental impact. So I think you need the face mask. I think you need the helmet because there's things you can't control. You know, the head to knee, the head to ground, where the padding is going to really prevent those injuries. So I don't think it's a real feasible alternative.
I guess a follow-up to that, if we look at the rugby model, where people instinctively turn their head away as opposed to going in with the helmet because they know it's protected and they can strike that way. Can you maybe add some additional?
Right. So rugby is another one of these kind of continuing questions. It's a very different game than football. If football evolved to something that looked more like rugby, then you could start to maybe have that discussion. But the speed, the direct speed of each other is very different in football, where the closing speeds are much higher. And the impacts are much greater energy level than what you see in football and rugby. So I think as long as football stays reasonably like football, I don't think taking the helmet off would be a good idea.
Great, thank you. Next question for for Dr. McCrea. I don't have a name on here. How much research is there on on physiologically raising the threshold of injury by diet, hydration, or other methods?
I can't cite the literature. Is this on? Or?
Sorry, can we get a microphone turned on, please?
Is there a button there?
Maybe, yeah.
I can't cite the specific literature, but I know there are groups out there, John Letty and others in their stress model and their active rehab model. They do monitor intake, nutritional and dietary and hydration intake. I have seen a handful of posters presented at meetings over the last 2 years or so. There might be individuals in the room here who are actually studying it from that perspective. I don't know of a definitive message other than what we already know from the literature on more severe brain injury about the importance of nutrition, feeding the energy-deprived brain, and hydration around recovery. I don't know if that of a large body of literature that is specific to athletes in how hydration and nutrition influence physiological recovery. I think intuitively, as Jeff pointed out, sleep, hydration, and nutrition are good wellness techniques regardless, and likely have a positive influence on physiological recovery, but I don't have a hard body of evidence to confirm that.
Understandable. Thank you. Question for Dr. Guskiewicz. Do you envision the kickoff being taken out of football, whether it's by the NFL, the NCAA, high school, youth leagues?
So let me just quickly touch on the question Mike just answered, but there is some literature suggesting that omega-3 fatty acid as a supplement. So I recognize that's not diet, but it's a dietary supplement that some of the animal literature suggests may have some neuroprotective effects, and both for acute concussion as well as for helping mitigate some of the long-term effects. And I think the jury's still out on that, but stay tuned. There's some papers in review. To the question about the kickoff, there's been an awful lot of talk about changing the kickoff. It's obviously the first play of the game, and so many people are just opposed to that sort of a dramatic change to just remove it. I think we should see how the rule change that's been put in place. It's obviously helping, even though that it still does have we see a disproportionate number of concussions on that play even today. But I would propose some additional changes to that, and rather than just eliminating the kickoff is my guess, but we'll see where it goes.
Great, thank you. Question for Dr. Randolph. Would you say that there is no strong evidence between Alzheimer's disease and concussion, and do we need more research in this area?
There's. You do something to turn it on, or
I think it just goes on.
it goes on after a while. How long does it take? There is a literature on moderate to severe TBI, and I think most of us believe that the increased incidence of dementia, late life progressive dementia in folks who have suffered a moderate to severe TBI is probably secondary to that reduced cerebral reserve that I mentioned before. So, for example, in Parkinson's disease, you need to lose over 85% of the neurons in a specific tract to become symptomatic. So the disease takes place for a long time before you get symptomatic. The same is true for Alzheimer's disease. Cerebral amyloid burden begins 15 plus years before you become clinically symptomatic. If you don't have enough brain left to fight that off, then you're going to be symptomatic earlier. In terms of concussion, I don't think we know yet, and that's why I'm counting on Mike and Kevin to carry out that study. I'm like one more plug for it to get started. But I think so. The question in collision sports is concussion a risk? Is repetitive concussion a risk, or is repetitive subconcussive trauma a risk? And we have ways of measuring that these days through the HIT system and other techniques. So depending upon your position, the number of years that you play, we can sort of calculate a score for that, as you know. I always wanted to call it the cumulative trauma exposure score, the CTE score, but Kevin won't go for that.
All right, great, thank you. Question for Dr. Baldwin. It has been said that children are more likely to have a concussion from riding a bike than from playing football. Can you provide some background on that statement?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the data bear that out. Bicycling is the leading cause of head injury for children. So.
Okay. Should we ban bike riding then?
No. You're asking the wrong person to answer that question.
I'll second that motion there. Fresh off the presses. I'm not even going to screen it. Dr. Randolph, do you believe that, somebody needs to work on their penmanship. Not that mine's good. Do you believe that a history of playing contact sports without sustaining concussion could place you at higher risk for neurological injury later in life?
It's a hypothesis, and it goes off and it comes back on, and I'll talk for it. So yes, I mean that's a hypothesis that I continue to hold. Maybe it'll get overturned like all my other hypotheses, but I worry about this notion of diminished cerebral reserve. If you take a professional football player with a long career who's played in youth sports, played in high school, played 5 years of college, and had a long professional career. If you look at the HITS data, I mean, it's a lot of trauma over time. I'm sort of more concerned about that and how that might lead to diminished cerebral reserve than by having one or two concussions. Now, luckily, this research group that we hold opposing hypotheses, which is a very good way of doing research, by the way. You should always hold conflicting hypotheses and pursue them both with equal vigor. So we'll see, and it may be one, maybe the other, maybe neither. But stay tuned as soon as Kevin finishes the study.
No pressure, Kevin and Mike.
I would just add that we do have some data on 32 former NFL players with 7 years of added exposure beyond college, match controls with those who were college only, so they played their 3.5 to 4 years of college ball, and we're studying them at age 58 to 62, 63, and what we have found is that there are no differences in neurocognitive screenings, on these individuals at that age. The only thing that explained differences in their fMRI was the diagnosed concussions. It wasn't the added 7 to 8 years of repetitive subconcussive exposure that explained the inefficient recruitment on fMRI. So, it's a snapshot.
I reviewed that paper.
Did you? Great. You'll see it in press soon.
All right. The question is for Dr. Baldwin, but I think Dr. McCrea and Dr. Randolph may be well suited for this as well. Please provide an opinion or perspective on the use of sideline concussion assessment tools such as the King-Devick, by coaches or other non-medical personnel to determine whether an athlete has sustained a concussion and can return to play.
I'll let my colleagues answer that question first.
So I'll make an editorial comment here, and the opinion that I've come to form, I guess, over the last decade or more is that no test outperforms a good clinician, and if having a test in your protocol is an indicator that you have a protocol, that's the proof. This is not, I think we've learned over the last 20 years, and as somebody pointed out earlier, we created the SAC in 1994 as a tool, some brief mental status screening tool that it would be feasible for use rink side, sideline, pool side, whatever it might be. But by no means did we ever intend for that measure to be used to, quote, diagnose concussion. I think, Chris made the comment earlier about symptom checklist effect sizes. The fact of the matter is there's no test out there that outperforms a good clinician. And so for me, it's really not about a test. It's about, do you have a systematic plan for the assessment of athletes and their management and return to play? You'd be shocked, and I think there are national statistics out there, at the percentage of high schools who still do not have any systematic protocol for concussion evaluation and management. And Kevin pointed out that 40% of U.S. high schools don't have an athletic trainer. I would bet in a very high percentage of those 40% of those schools that don't have an athletic trainer, they also probably do not have any systematic guideline and management protocol for concussion. And that's the part that bothers me the most. This is not going to be about computerized testing. It's not going to be about MRI. Is there a systematic plan in place? Because we know when athletes are managed well, they do well, and you drastically reduce risk.
Chris, any add-on to that?
I would echo what Mike said and just add that, emphasize that none of these tests diagnose concussion. There's nothing that diagnoses a concussion other than your clinical diagnosis of an alteration in your neurological status as a result of mechanical force applied to your head. So you can perform poorly on the SAC or the King-Devic or any other silly test. Not that the SAC is silly, but or any other test that you want, and that poor performance can be due to something other than concussion. So it's not a diagnostic test; it's a tool to help you monitor the symptoms that appear to be related to a concussive injury. And I think so. Mike's point is well taken there. I'll just also say that I was a huge believer in baseline testing when we started testing all the Chicago Bears, and it was really fun for a while. But I think baseline testing is largely useless in the management of sport-related concussion. So I'll just throw that out there as a bonus.
All right. When we bring you back next time, you can inform us why. So, unfortunately, we're running out of time. Lunch is going to start here in a minute, but I'll just add in relative to the comment about coaches, them making the decision as whether an athlete needs to be held out. There's a very strong conflict of interest there, and Coach Carr alluded to that this morning. So, I don't think that's a position that we want to get ourselves in. We want to leave it up to the people that are trained in that area to make those decisions. So thank you to our speakers from this morning for taking time to answer some questions.